Hello, my name is Logan Ward, and I'm a graduate teaching associate in the Crest Foundation Department of Art History at the University of Kansas. In this video, I will be going over the basics of art historical inquiry and its primary method called visual analysis. I will also be reviewing important art historical terms that can help you when you are asked to do a visual analysis. To help exemplify the concepts in this lecture, I will refer to Shin Hakchar's rice planting. Art history as a discipline is concerned with several questions, each of which is related to either visual culture or material culture. Visual culture generally refers to anything that is intended to be looked at, like a painting or print. These tend to be called artworks. Material culture generally refers to anything that is intended to be used, such as a ceramic vessel or a silk robe. These tend to be called objects, although artwork is also common. However, whether an object or artwork counts as visual culture or material culture is also dependent on the question that I ask about it. Art history asks many questions, but there are four basic questions that anyone working in art history asks. The overarching question that art historians ask is, why do things look different over time? From this question derives two sub-questions. One is, why does something look the way that it looks? This question positions that something as visual culture. The other question is, why is something made out of what it is made out of? This question positions that something as material culture. As you can imagine, I could ask either of these questions about something like a painting, but my answers would yield very different stories about the painting, one focused on the visual and one focused on the material. The fourth major question in art history is, what is the relationship between visual or material culture and society? This is the question that requires much more than looking to answer, and depending on the exact object or artwork, many different answers could result even for just one. This question requires contextualization of the visual and material qualities of the object or artwork. Context refers to the conditions, situations, or intentions under which the object or artwork was created, has endured to the present, or is currently undergoing. Art history most specifically considers the historical context, that is, what is occurring at a given time, and attempts to understand an object or artwork's visual or material qualities based on these. Answers to these questions are interpretations of an artwork or object. Interpretation refers to the meaning or significance that an individual or collective has made of an artwork or object. A single artwork or object can have multiple interpretations, even sometimes dissonant ones. However, what makes a good interpretation is not whether it is the best or only possible, but rather that it has been evidenced thoroughly. In art history, we use visual analysis to evidence our interpretations. A visual analysis is a written essay of varying length with the goal of answering an art historical question. Thus, a strong visual analysis does two things. One, it describes an artwork or object, and two, it interprets an artwork or object with evidence. To describe an artwork or object is to put into words what can be seen in the artwork or object. When trying to describe something, focus only on what you can see, and do your best to write it so that someone who cannot see the artwork or object can imagine it for themselves. There are several things that you can talk about when describing an artwork or object. The first thing you may want to do is state the title, the artist, and the date of the artwork or object, if that information is available. So in the case of this artwork, it is Shin Hakchar's rice planting made in 1987. Next, you will want to clarify the medium. Medium is what the artwork or object is made of, but in visual analysis, try to be specific. For example, Shin Hakchar's rice planting is not just a painting, but an oil painting on canvas. Furthermore, you should clarify the format if there is one. Format is the way that the artwork or object is constructed so that it can be displayed. Shin Hakchar's rice planting does not necessarily have a format beyond its medium, but if you're working with something like a hand scroll or hanging scroll, be sure to clarify that. Finally, if you know that the artwork or object belongs to a specific genre, identify it as well. Genre is a messy term in art history, but it generally refers to a specific category of art based on its overall visual qualities. For example, I may want to say that Shin Hakchar's rice planting is somewhat surrealist, but also representational. This lets the reader or listener know what to expect going forward. After you have these accomplished, you will want to identify specific discernible icons in the artwork or object. The term icon can have many meanings, but in visual analysis, an icon is a representation of someone or something's likeness. Another common term in art history like icon is subject, but subject tends to be more about the focal icon of an artwork rather than all the icons that appear in an image. As an example of identifying icons in Shin Hakchar's rice planting, there are people working in a rice field, people dancing and eating, children playing, an ox, a mountain range, and a heap of miscellaneous objects. Notice how I include the actions that certain icons perform to differentiate them. This is especially helpful when talking about humans in an image. However, if you want to help the reader or listener imagine the artwork or object, you will need to be more specific than this. To help you talk about icons, you should consider three aspects of how an icon is represented. One is composition. Composition refers to how icons in an image are arranged in relation to one another. This concerns particularly their position, size, or number. It can also consider the different spaces that are carved out in a single image. A primary discrepancy to look for in a two-dimensional work, like a painting, is the relationship between the background and the foreground. For example, to enhance my observation that there is an ox, I could say something like a large ox appears in the foreground to the right of the center. Notice how I comment on both the size and position of the icon. Or for the children playing in the background near the mountain range, I could say, 3 children appear to frolic and play before a mountain range in the background in the upper right corner. Here I commented on each aspect of the composition and related the two icons to each other within the image. Related to composition is perspective, and this is the second aspect to help you describe something. Perspective refers to the angle from which an icon or scene is depicted or viewed. Is the scene zoomed in or zoomed out? When I look from the bottom to the top of the image, how does it seem to move? For example, in Shin Hakcho's rice planting, as the viewer looks higher, the scene recedes to the background mountain range. When talking about human and animal subjects, perspectives can be particularly helpful to understand the viewer's relationship with them. For example, the ox is depicted head-on and stares directly at the viewer. Not only does this statement help me imagine what the ox looks like, but it also evokes the eerie feeling of being looked at by the ox. The final thing to consider when describing icons in an image is style. Style, quite simply, refers to the way that something looks. You can talk about the colors or fills, the texture, the lines or outlines, the shapes, light and dark, or any other basic visual aspect of an icon that you can think of. I can enhance my description of the ox and rice planting even further by including that it is a brown ox with 2 short white horns. Its eyes are black and its nose and mouth are tan. I could also say something like, the artist refrained from using outline to shape the ox and instead used chiaroscuro to evoke light coming from the ox's right, leaving the ox's left in shadow. The extent to which you describe an artwork or object is dependent on the assignment at hand. Unless you are doing a deep study of a single artwork, it is unlikely that you need to touch on every aspect of what you see in your description. Instead, consider how you can describe an object or artwork to best help you answer the given question. Furthermore, the medium of the artwork that you describe will dictate any special vocabulary that you may need to describe it. For example, I used the term chiaroscuro earlier, which in painting refers to alternating light and dark colors to evoke a single light source in an image, giving it a three-dimensional feel. In an art history class, your instructor should teach you these terms and make sure that you understand their meanings. The second job that visual analysis does is to interpret an artwork or object with evidence. To interpret is to make meaning of an artwork or object, and a good visual analysis supplies proof for this meaning. There are 2 kinds of evidence available in visual analysis. One is visual evidence from your description of the artwork or object. This is the whole reason we went to the trouble of describing what we see. Another is textual evidence. Textual evidence provides the historical context for an object or artwork, and it allows you to understand the object beyond only what can be seen. Sources can include readings from class, lectures or lecture slides, or verifiable information from videos. There are a few things that you can consider when interpreting an artwork or object. One is iconography. Iconography refers to the study of what an icon is and how you can know what it is based on its visual features. This essentially means putting a name to all those icons that you see in an image. Here, you will probably need both visual and textual evidence. For example, the mountain in the background is Mount Paektu, the mountain at the northern border between Korea and China. The range is notable for its summit of a ring of mountains around a lake called Cheonji, or Heaven's Lake. This is further inferred by the placement of the mountains in the background of the image, as if it were in the north. You may not necessarily need a citation in this case to prove that the mountain is Mount Paektu, but in some cases, like if the icon's identity is more dubious, it would be helpful. A further aspect of iconography is symbolism. Symbolism refers to the abstract or culturally constructed meanings of an icon. These can be specific to the artist or more broadly a part of a culture. This primarily requires textual evidence to prove. For example, Mount Paektu is the mythical birthplace of the first North Korean leader, Kim Il-sung, and thus symbolizes the Kims in North Korean contexts. However, for Shin, Mount Paektu symbolized Korea reunited and extended from the southern end of the peninsula to the northern end of the peninsula where Mount Paektu is located. Here, I would put a citation to when the artist Shin stated this. I may also want to cite a source about Mount Paektu as a symbol of the Kims as well. Another thing that you can discuss in interpreting an artwork or object is the maker's original intent for it. This is essentially why it was made and how this reasoning affects its meaning. This will require both visual and textual evidence. My reference to Shin's personal interpretation of Mount Paektu already did this. Something else I could talk about is how Shin created it for and displayed it in an exhibition titled Reunification from 1987 to 1989. This would further indicate that the artist intended for the painting to express his hope for the reunification of North and South Korea. A final consideration when interpreting an artwork or object is any stories of significance related to the artwork or object. How was it received by audiences? What legacy did it leave? If you are writing a visual analysis, these questions have likely already been posed to you. When I talk about Shin's rice planting, I will want to talk about how the artist was imprisoned from August to October 1989 because the Seoul police thought that the icon of Mount Paektu was a pro-North Korean symbol. We will want citations, especially to primary sources, to evidence this. My last point to consider for visual analysis is how to structure your writing. Everyone structures their visual analysis differently, but certain structures are easier to follow than others. A good structure to practice when analyzing one artwork is to have the first few paragraphs dedicated to describing it, and then the remaining dedicated to interpreting it with evidence. Another way to structure it works well if you are only discussing a few aspects of the artwork or object. You can describe one aspect at a time and draw attention to it, and then interpret it with evidence in the same paragraph. So it would look something like this. When asked to do a comparative visual analysis of two or more artworks or objects, do not describe and interpret one and then describe and interpret the other. Instead, talk about the two artworks together. Make your comparisons obvious. For example, this painting is done in ink, but this painting is done in oil. Remember to use contrasting words like but, however, on the other hand, contrarily, etc. Do not forget the similarities between the two either. Generally, having one paragraph dedicated to differences and another dedicated to similarities can be helpful to organize your comparison. Thank you for listening, and I hope that this will help you as you venture to write your visual analyses. Please view the written examples that should be available on Canvas in the Visual Analysis module. Also, check out the Art Historical Terms word bank on Canvas as well to help you with your module quiz. In the meantime, if you have questions, please reach out to me via email. logan.ward@ku.edu. Thank you.